call this Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science and related agencies to order. No senator would want to be in a hearing in which they couldn't be heard, so we think we've solved that issue. I'll begin with an opening statement, recognize the ranking member, introduce our witness panel, and we'll hear your testimony and then take questions. Welcome to today's Commerce, Justice, and Science and related agencies Subcommittee hearing. The hearing will examine the fiscal year FY19 funding requests for and activities of the International Trade Administration, the Bureau of Industry and Security within the Department of Commerce, and the United States International Trade Commission. I welcome and thank our witness panel for being here. Collectively, the mission of these three agencies represented here this morning play a significant role in supporting the United States' economic prosperity, our national security, and our foreign policy through promotion and enforcement of our trade policies, laws, and agreements. The importance of the work that these agencies perform has been recently thrust into the spotlight as the administration continues to pursue aggressive trade strategies. In just the past few weeks, we've seen a preliminary agreement between the United States and Mexico on a revamped North America Free Trade Agreement. Public hearings have been held regarding proposed tariffs on approximately $200 billion worth of Chinese products, and reporting is out there that the administration may soon implement these proposed $200 billion worth of additional tariffs on those products. All of these actions have a nexus with the agencies and the work they perform. The work of these agencies is particularly important to me in my home state of Kansas, as trade and exports are how many Kansans make a living. Over 400,000 jobs in our state are supported by global trade. In order for these agencies to succeed and to benefit my constituents and Americans across the country, Congress must make certain that the necessary resources are available to carry out their missions. Despite the noted increase in trade activity, the administration has requested less funding in fiscal year 19 than enacted levels of fiscal year 18 for both the International Trade Administration and the U.S. International Trade Commission. Fiscal year 2019 budget request for the Bureau of Industry and Security is $120 million, $7 million above the 18 enacted level. I hope our witnesses this morning will inform this subcommittee about their respective agencies and ongoing work, as well as shed more light on the administration's trade policies and strategy. Before recognizing the ranking member for her remarks, I'll briefly introduce the panel. Mr. Nezak Akartar is the Assistant Secretary for Industry and Analysis at the International Trade Administration. The Industry and Analysis Unit devises and implements international trade, investment, and export promotion strategies and strengthens the global competitiveness of U.S. industries. I understand ITA has been providing considerable assistance to the Bureau of Industry and Security and the United States Trade Representative as it relates to Section 232 and Section 301 investigations and resulting tariffs. I look forward to hearing you elaborate on ITA's involvement in those activities. Mr. Ashu is the Assistant Secretary for Export Administration at the Bureau of Industry and Security, whose activities include managing the U.S. export control and treaty compliance systems and promoting U.S. strategic technology leadership. The Bureau of Industry and Security is responsible for investigating the effects of imports on national security under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. BIS is also in charge of the exemption process for tariffs implemented as a result of Section 232 investigations. I hope that we'll hear about that work today. And lastly, Mr. David S. Johansen is the Chairman of the United States International Trade Commission. The United States International Trade Commission is an independent, quasi-judicial federal agency that administers U.S. trade remedy laws, provides the President, the U.S. Trade Representative, and Congress with independent analysis, information, and support on matters of tariffs, international trade, and U.S. competitiveness, and maintains the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. Welcome to all of you. We look forward to your testimony today, and I now do recognize the ranking member, the Senator from New Hampshire, Senator Shaheen. I thank all three of you, and I'm going to begin with at least my initial question with Mr. Ashu. Secretary Ross testified before this subcommittee in May. He stated at that time the Department of Commerce has received some 8,700 product exclusion requests in response to Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. Recently, our committee staff learned that as of August the 20th, the Department of Commerce was in receipt of 31,000 properly submitted exclusion requests, more than threefold increase from May. and that the department has only issued decisions for 2,871, or about 9% of those requests. It concerns me that approximately 90% of the submitted exclusion requests are still awaiting a decision, which has substantial impacts on many U.S. companies, including Kansas companies, who are currently operating in limbo. First of all, I would ask you to confirm or adjust those numbers. Do we have the right numbers? And then elaborate on BIS's role in processing those exclusion requests, and then I'll have a couple of other questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's no question there's been a significant number of exclusion requests. The number we have currently is 39,000, almost 40,000. And by the way, these numbers are all in my written testimony, so the committee will have them. And the BIS has disposed of about 10,000 of those, meaning that there's about 28,000 being considered right now. There's no question that any time spent for a company on a decision like this is too much time. So we've spent a great deal of time trying to accelerate that process, and in fact have taken a significant amount of time out of the process that needs to be considered here. But I would say, without the committee's help, we wouldn't be able to do the work we're doing. This requires human beings who know what they're doing, and because of the reprogramming, we were enabled to bring on 15 additional contractors, which may not sound like a lot, but for a bureau our size, it was a very significant help, helped us increase our processing time. And then again, with the cooperation of other agencies, especially ITA, we're able to bring more people to the table here. We're still in the midst of benefiting from that. So we think these numbers are going to improve even further, because the contractors were really only fully onboarded in the past 6 weeks or so.
And on that topic, let me ask, when you talked about taking some time out of the process, and you also talked about additional resources, the reprogramming request that we approved, plus moving personnel, I assume, around to address this issue. Where is the bottleneck? Is the process the right process, and you just need more resources, people to implement it, or the process is too cumbersome and needs to be altered?
So the process is a complicated one in that several reviews need to occur, and there really is no substitute for that. We rely on ITA to do the industry analysis when weighing objections to exclusion requests. And just to back up a little bit, when a company requests an exclusion, if there is no objection, then the process is much quicker. But if there is an objection, we need to allow for that objection to be heard and reviewed, and we do rely on ITA to help us with that. BIS applies a national security test as well, and again, no substitute for that. Where I think we can do better is we are reliant on a system that utilizes HTS codes to be as very specific as possible. And that's an area where we don't own that system. That's when we work with Customs and Border Protection. They own the HTS codes. And so we're very reliant on a system that's not resident in commerce. We work very well with CBP. They work very closely with us, but it's a very cumbersome system. We are looking at improvements to do that. Most likely those improvements will involve some sort of IT solution, and that is underway, but it's not been implemented yet, but it's definitely one of the things in our job jar to work on.
Was the agency preparing for the change in the President or the administration's trade policy in advance of that change, or it's been playing catch-up since then?
Let me make sure I understand.
So the question is, were you aware, or were you made aware that potential changes were coming in regard to tariffs, particularly in this case, Section 232, and therefore began ramping up your preparedness? Or has it been playing catch-up since the announcement since the determinations were made in regard to 232?
Thank you, so I understand. The 232 process that BIS manages is a very methodical process. It begins with an investigation that is, actually, there's a fairly low bar to initiate an investigation, and so the time spent on that investigation took the full 270 days that the statute allows, and during that time, it really is more about understanding, in this case, the national security implications of imports on steel and aluminum, but this would apply in any case. And that is where our attentions were focused, was on doing the proper study. Once recommendations are made to the President, that is only when policy, and in this case, tariffs to deal with capacity issues, were implemented. So we weren't, I wouldn't say that we were anticipating a remedy. All we were doing was coming up with recommendations that would then be up to the White House to determine.
I'm going to fudge a bit on my time, and I'll try to be very generous to my colleagues. But you mentioned the objection process, and that if there is an objection, it becomes a slower determination. I don't know that these numbers may have changed, as the numbers I quoted earlier have already, but the committee is aware that as of August the 20th, the Department of Commerce had received some 15,000 industry objections, which apply to approximately 9,600 exclusion requests filed in response to Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. We understand that of those 9,600 exclusion requests, as of August the 20th, decisions had only been issued in 376 cases, or 4%. And of those 376 exclusion requests for which a decision has been issued, the overwhelming majority, 356, or nearly 95%, resulted in a denial of the exclusion. Are those accurate statistics, and is there an explanation for what seemingly to me seems like a biased response if there's an objection? And secondly, is there an opportunity for the corporation pursuing the exclusion to then respond to the objection or the denial of the exclusion?
I'm smiling because I was trying to keep up with your numbers, and they differ slightly from mine, which I think is a timing. But I think the general trends are not wrong, and certainly I'll caucus with your staff after to make sure we get those numbers right. But of the posted decisions that we have, which is about 4,000 posted, we don't like the processing time that it's taking. We allowed ourselves 90 days. We're within that, but that's still a long time, and we understand that. As far as what is granted versus denied, one of the things that we've learned is that and we learned this through a rulemaking that we have just concluded, and I'll talk about that in a minute, where we accepted public comments, and we listened very closely to those public comments. And what we learned was that the existing exclusion and objection process that we have is not adequate, and that there needed to be more of a rebuttal process built in. Now, adding process means taking time, but we feel that the ability for companies to weigh in greater detail is very important, and so we have just today issued a rule. It's on the BIS website, which is bis.doc.gov, that folks can review. And what that does is implement a rebuttal process that will provide far more density and clarity to the objection process. And public, all this is something that is quite transparent. It's all public when it's done, and we're hoping that will alleviate some of the concerns.
Does the rebuttal process take place after the objection is entered, but before BIS makes a determination?
It's before BIS makes a determination.
Senator Shaheen.